Hey, thank you.
All right, and with that, I am proud to introduce our spotlight speaker, Bryan Seck, and he is the Chief Talent Management Strategist for Kawasaki, and he also he's the founder of MyLink, the founder of a product called MyLink, and he's going to talk about that and what that does for our community. So thank you, Bryan.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Brooke, and thanks, Nawaf, for having me. So basically what I'd like to do is talk about three things. One is MyLink, which is an app that we have here in Lincoln and 19 counties across Nebraska that provides information about nonprofit services. The second thing I'll talk about is the second part of my entrepreneurial journey, where I own a consulting firm similar to what many of you have described. And the third part will be talking about what we're doing here at Kawasaki, and I promise all that will be in 15 minutes or less. Because I see that Darren Kruger is in the audience, and he has an attention span of about 6 minutes, so I feel like I really only have 6. 7 years ago, I was the homeless outreach coordinator for Lincoln Public Schools. Lincoln Public Schools has a position that only works with homeless students because we have about 500 every year who become homeless, every year. LPS has about 44,000 students, about 43% of those are free reduced lunch, about 500 become homeless every year. 90% of those families who became homeless had never been homeless before. So we're not really talking about families who are chronically homeless. We're not talking about families under a bridge. We don't have families under bridges in Lincoln. We don't see that. And also, 90% of families became homeless while working. So we're not talking about unemployed people. We're not talking about chronically homeless people. What we're talking about is underemployed people. Most of the time, one of the key reasons where families became homeless was a lack of savings. Something bad happened, a car broke down, a medical expense, a funeral expense, and the family couldn't afford it. The other variable that caused homelessness was domestic violence. And that's where you typically have a heterosexual relationship. There's certainly domestic violence and homosexual relationships, but let's assume this is a heterosexual one. Let's also assume that the man is abusing the woman. That's not always true. It's usually true. My rule of thumb when I'm working with, that's not a good metaphor. My rule that I use when I'm working with human service workers is if they say something is always true, I don't think you're a good human services worker. I don't think there's anything such as always. There is only usually. Usually, in a domestic violence situation, the man is abusing the woman, not always. So let's imagine that's true. They're both making about $12 an hour. $12 an hour times 2 is $24 an hour. That's roughly about $50,000 a year. In Lincoln, you can make it, if you're careful, as a family, on $50,000 a year, if you're careful. Now, imagine that she leaves. Can she get a new apartment, security deposit, first month's rent, buy new furniture, all this stuff when she escapes domestic violence? No. Domestic violence is nasty for 10,000 reasons, but that's why it causes homelessness, is the economic situation. So the reason I tell you this story is that as the homeless outreach specialist, really what I discovered, my job wasn't to find families under bridges. We don't have families under bridges. My job was to identify families who had become homeless due to something that happened. They're usually going to be in one of our homeless shelters, the Friendship Home, St. Gianna's, the Mission, Cedar, something like that. Or more likely, they're actually going to be doubled up. They're going to be living with somebody else who does have a home, and they're going to move into that apartment and have 5 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's what we would see most of the time. So I'd be working with these families and helping them access resources. I used to carry around a PDF document about this thick that was produced by DHHS and another one produced by the Center for People in Need here locally about all the different nonprofit services. Now, all of you know probably what I'm going to say. The moment you print something, it's out of date. So I had always had this dream that we could have an app on people's phones that would have all the nonprofit information. Think about the food bank. Think about domestic violence. Think about free health care that we have through Clinic with a Heart, Blue Stem Health, all these different places. Remember that 90% of the families that I worked with had never been homeless before. Many times, they've never heard of Matt Talbot. They think that's a person, not a place. Families simply don't know about the resources that exist. 7 days a week, including Sunday, there are at least 13 places to have free food in Lincoln. 13. But families used to call me crying at the end of the month because their food stamps had run out, EBT, but everyone calls them food stamps, had run out at the end of the month, and simply didn't know that 3, 4, 5 blocks away from their apartment at Candlewood Church at 27th and Vine, there was food distribution. They simply didn't know. They were calling me saying, we don't have any food until the first of the month, what are we gonna do? So we went through this journey of creating an app. So we worked with Don't Panic Labs, which is a company here locally. They donated their time to create this app. It has been around for 5 years now. It has about 15,000 downloads. We're close to 16 now. It is going now in 19 counties, including Lancaster County. In Lincoln, there's over 600 organizations on the app. And it is shared by every LPS counselor, every cop, every firefighter. Bryan Health shares it when people exit the ER. It's shared at all of our low-cost clinics. And it translates into Arabic, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Somali. We added Somali because there's lots of Somali immigrants and refugees in Kearney, which is one of our areas that we serve. The app works offline. This is important because when you're thinking about families that we serve, they have a smartphone. Everybody has a phone. A phone is more important than a car. A phone is really more important than an apartment in some ways. What happens if school calls and you don't answer? Your kid is sick, school calls and you don't answer. They call HHS if you don't answer after a certain number of calls. The phone is the most important thing that our families own, far and away. It's not even close anymore, because all of your information is here and the way to access you is here. The difference between many of the families that we serve and those of us in this room and on Zoom is that I pay Verizon a set number of dollars each month based on the plan that I choose. Most of our families go to Cricket or PCS Wireless. Have you ever seen a Cricket in South Lincoln? No, that's because it's not for people in South Lincoln living in the Ridge. It's for families living on North 27th who buy prepaid phone cards. You charge up certain minutes on this, and more importantly, you buy data so you can text. The way to reach our families in need is not to call them, it's to text them. They don't have a cell phone plan, they buy prepaid minutes. So we created this app, and you may be thinking, Bryan, you said families have a phone, but how are they going to download the app? What we do is we've trained cops and firefighters and teachers and ER personnel and sheriffs and HHS workers and VA workers about the app, so when they talk to their families and they're under Wi-Fi, they download it. The cool thing is about the app is it works offline. So imagine a family downloads the app while they're at a school. They go back to their apartment at 13th and G that doesn't have Wi-Fi or cell phone service. The app still works because it's physically on their phone, and it translates without having internet connection. So that way maybe the child can speak English, but the parent doesn't, it'll still work. So the reason that we created MyLink was to get from an analog world to a digital world. And that's really been an entrepreneurial journey because it started here in Lincoln as something that myself and a group of people through Leadership Lincoln created. And Don't Panic Labs did all the real work, right? We just had the idea. But what it's grown to is a business. Now 19 different counties all across Nebraska pay to be part of our network, and then we help them outreach into the community so that they too can have a tool in more rural communities for people to access services. Rural poverty is just as real as poverty in a city, but sometimes it's harder to see. So having an app prevents some of the problems with pride, where maybe people might be too proud to call, maybe too proud to show up for a service, but if they know about MyLink, they can download it, check it out, see if it's what they need, and then access it. So the entrepreneurial journey on MyLink has really been, we created something here, and all the other people who have bought it, including some out-of-state people that we're working on talking to, heard about it through word of mouth and said, ah, that's a tool that we want also. Very exciting. The second part of the journey is Walther Seck associates. So Janelle Walther is my boss. Well, that's also true. She's also my wife. And she is Dr. Janelle Walther, PhD, for those asking. And she works at the University of Nebraska in the Public Policy Center. And similar to what Marquez Consulting does, is what we do is we provide consulting on nonprofit strategic plans and also on evaluation and metrics. So many nonprofits must have a strategic plan in order to apply for grants. These expire every 3 to 5 years, and Janelle and I have a process where we walk through kind of in a retreat type setting to do that. What I wanted to share with you here also is that it's amazing how word of mouth works. So we started in Lincoln, now we're all the way across the state, and we're starting to get more and more responses. And I think that's just due to somewhat COVID letting up on us, but also people haven't updated their strategic plans in the last couple of years due to COVID, and now they really need to. So it's kind of an interesting market to be in. And that's something that we do on the nights and weekends, something that we do, really, it's a business, but it's something that we love to do because it's fascinating and just really empowering to watch nonprofits take the strategic plan and grow. The last part is who pays me day to day. So there's 3 parts in every life, right? We all contain multitudes, and that's Kawasaki. And so I've been with Kawasaki for all of 2 months, and my job is to help them grow. Kawasaki has about 2,000 employees in Lincoln right now, another 1,000 or so that are in Maryville, Missouri. In Maryville, we build lawnmower engines. And in Lincoln, we build jet skis, ATVs, mules, Terex, and also, fun fact, tell your friends, many people don't know this, every subway car for New York City and Washington, D.C., Long Island Railroad, the Connecticut Railroad, made right here in Lincoln, Nebraska. True story. Next time you're in New York, go on the subway, look up, it says manufactured in Lincoln, Nebraska. And then we also make the cargo door for the Boeing 777, right here in Lincoln. And so you may have seen in the news that Kawasaki is expanding. We're looking to hire 500 people in the next 6 to 9 months, and then probably 500 more people after that, in addition to what we already have. Really what that is we've seen unbelievable demand for the products that we make. You think about what we make, recreational vehicles, jet skis. These are things that people can do in a socially distanced environment. And anybody who makes anything in the outdoors area, grills, lawnmowers, have seen unbelievable demand. So really our dealers who sell the products that we make are asking us for more and more and more products. So we'll be adding more people, adding capacity at Kawasaki. And what we're doing there is really taking the model of what we did with homeless outreach and workforce development, which is everybody's already working in Lincoln. 90% of those families who became homeless while working. They're underemployed, they're not unemployed. So when we think about Lincoln, Lincoln has a 1.9% unemployment rate, 1.9. It was about 2.8, 2.9% before the pandemic. Our unemployment rate is lower than before the pandemic. Currently, in Lincoln, Nebraska, I shouldn't say that. In the month of July, in Lincoln, Nebraska, there were 14,000 open positions. There are 3,000 people receiving unemployment benefits. Everybody's working. Now, what we're going for is the underemployed population, because there's lots of people who desire a job who aren't counted on unemployment because they were longer than 6 months, they don't get counted anymore. There's also lots of people who are working part-time here, part-time there, who desire a full-time job. One of the hard things about getting people into manufacturing is that people simply don't know they can do it, because we will train people from the first moment they walk in to be safe and successful in our facility. Our positions start at $18.10 an hour, which is better than almost any other place. And if you're a welder, or we can train you to be a welder, it starts at $19.90 an hour. I've been saying for years in Lincoln that $40,000 is basically the magic number to kind of get to middle class in Lincoln. $18 an hour is about $38,000 a year, but with the overtime that people can sign up for and be eligible for, you're going to hit that number. So one of the reasons why I was really excited to come to Kawasaki is that the benefits are good, Pay is good. We offer 3 different shifts. So people can find an opportunity that fits them, and we can really kind of find some of these people that are underemployed, that have always wanted a full-time job with benefits, but haven't been able to find it, and get them over here. So what we're working on now is really an expedited interview and assessment process to where we could bring Nawaf in, have him go through our interview process, have him go through our assessment process, and have a job offer within about 3 hours. Before, that would have taken a little bit longer for our mechanisms to click into place. And what we're really doing is expediting this, knowing that if we're competing with a fast food environment, fast food will turn around a job offer in about 12 hours. You'll be starting the next day. We need to compete with that kind of speed in this environment where there are 14,000 jobs. So really, when I think about our challenge at Kawasaki, it's how do we find the people who really want to move into that full-time position? How do we move at the speed necessary, knowing that people have options? And then how do we increase community awareness that manufacturing is an accessible position? We have many women on the floor who are welders, who are production. Our production floor speaks about 15 different languages. We're about 13% Latino. People don't know that. People don't know that this is something that I can do no matter my ethnicity, no matter my gender. This is a place where you can come in and be successful. We really have to get over that stigma that manufacturing is something that maybe it's dirty, maybe it's something that I don't know how to do. It's an incredibly clean environment. It has to be, because we're building brand new products. So at Kawasaki, we're hiring 500 people now. We're having 500 more people soon. Starts at $18 an hour. Tell your friends. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or thoughts.
Some of my friends, I've referred them to Kawasaki, but there's a stigma of monotonous work associated with a factory position. What do you have to say about that kind of stigma?
Certainly manufacturing is not something where you get to like walk around and do whatever you want during the day. That's certainly true. We will train you to do a specific position, but there's growth within manufacturing. So it wouldn't be a position that you would sit there and do for the next 42 years of your life, get your gold watch and walk away. We will train people into positions, and then after that they can grow. They can become team leaders, they can become supervisors, or what you can do is become more specialized in your trade. So let's say that you go into the engines department. There's different classes that we offer internally to where you can become more of an expert and move your pay up and stay in the department, or you'd be able to transfer out and go into a different department if that's what you choose. So to someone who said this feels monotonous to me, I would say when you start a position with Kawasaki, we want you to master it, and then after that you have options to go into other areas of the facility, whether that be subways, jet skis, ATVs, or the aerospace department, which makes the cargo door. It's a good question. That's one of the reasons why when we have people come in for an assessment and an interview, we walk them through the facility so you can really see what a day in the life looks like. I can't promise that every day will be different from day one, but I can promise that you have an ocean of opportunities once you're here.
What did you say the percentages of kids who are on food, reduced food?
About 43% on free reduced lunch. It's pretty typical for a school district of our size. I've lived all over the country. I've lived all over the world. I moved here from New York. I lived in DC before that. I served in the Peace Corps. I've lived in Spain and Russia. I grew up in Wichita partly. LPS is one of the best school districts in the country. So for us to have a 43% free reduced lunch rate and have the graduation rate that we do, it's truly unbelievable. And I don't say that just as a former employee of LPS, it's pretty amazing. But yeah, we're about 43% free reduced lunch. That number is hard to know this year because with the pandemic, there's blanket assistance with lunch, but that's more of a pre-pandemic level, but I anticipate it would be similar. And that's publicly available if you wanted to check it out.
When you first started, or when you went from the PDF to having this app idea,
Yeah.
MyLink, can you tell us about what the hardest or a hurdle that you encountered, and then how you overcame that hurdle?
Yeah, so when we started MyLink and really moving it from this PDF document into a digital setting, really I think the most important thing was creating buy-in, because DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that PDF document, right? That was a lot of work to put that thing together. The Center for People in Need did a ton of work to put that thing together. So it wouldn't have been very nice of me to say, cool, thanks. I'm going to make this app. It's going to be great. Thank you. So no, what we did is we sat down with DHHS and Center for People in Need, other major players in the nonprofit environment. If you think about Cause Collective, Cedars, The Hub, we basically said, hey, do you think this would be a good idea? One of the lessons that I learned the hard way when I served in the Peace Corps is you can have a wonderful idea, and you can run through walls, and you can look behind you and find nobody's there with you. If you want to be successful, and if you want that success to be sustained, you need a team with you. So what we did is we built that team to where HHS and Center for People in Need were like, oh my gosh, yes, this thing's exhausting us, it's wearing us out. If this could be a digital database, which is really what an app is, that would help decrease our workload. So it turned out that both these agencies were like, yes, this is great. That's huge, because having people say fine versus, oh, we're excited about this, we're going to tell everybody, we're going to train our staff, it's going to be awesome, those are two completely different things. So I think the hurdle was really understanding that you can do something, but it takes more time and it's harder to go get that buy-in, build your team, and move forward. So if you fast forward to today, those two agencies are two of our biggest champions of MyLink. When other communities call, we have them talk to them and be like, hey, this is what it looks like. So I think that was really the hardest thing with MyLink. And then after that was really communicating with the community that, remember those two PDF books? This is it. There's somewhat of a fear in the nonprofit community of like, oh my gosh, another thing. It's another thing we have to do, it's another report we have to write, and I understand that because I've been in the nonprofit community. So it was really kind of selling the community that this isn't a new thing, this is actually combining two things. So remember how you used to get asked to update the DHHS book and the Center for People in Need book? Not anymore. It's all right here. You update it once, you're done. Here's the email if you want to update it again. It'll get updated within 24 hours. You have our solemn promise. And then we really kind of built people's trust. We put posters in all the different languages. We trained everyone on it. I think that's really the biggest overcoming hurdles were not only getting buy-in, but building a team to move forward. And then the second part was informing the community about something, because I bet you all have tried this as entrepreneurs. It is hard, hard, hard to tell people about your service. It sounds easy. People are like, oh yeah, use social media. And you're like, really? That's great advice. Thank you. That's like Darren Kruger level advice. Like, that's so good. No, that's bad advice. So really getting your word out there in the community is challenging. And we've spent 2 or 3 years before it really took off to where it is now.
I'm curious about, so you go off and write an app, but I mean, you found that there are other communities that need something remarkably similar.
Yeah.
But at least the way you describe it, the underlying idea of the app is like it's a very highly relevant application of technology, but on the other hand, it's like it's a very generic thing, and one would have thought that this app would have been written already like 100 times already, or maybe somebody who wrote a really good one someplace that you could just kind of like grab it, put your own branding on it, put your own content in it, and run with it. I mean, was there a search that you did to see whether there are other things that are similar, or how do you decide to say, hey, we need our own app developers to create this?
Yeah, so I'm 40 now, which is kind of crazy. And one of my rules in life is that I will not create something new unless I have to. I hate recreating the wheel. I will work with somebody else's wheel if it's there. And what we did is we looked around, and really there's no one else in this digital app space. So some of you may be familiar with United Way 211. That's a live phone call-based service that has a similar database. But what we know is most of our families don't call. They use the phone to find information. Voice calls, not as much. So when we talked to the agencies and we said, hey, will this app be useful? What the agency said is yes, because this is how people operate now. Also, the nice thing about the app is it's truly a database with an interaction function on top of it, so it lets us maintain the database on the back end. Now to your question, we really didn't find anybody out there doing this, and still to this day, there's not really another app out there that a community could purchase and then work with Don't Panic Labs to customize it to their needs. Really the challenge is in other communities, if you're like, why isn't this everywhere? It's finding the right person in the community who has the wherewithal to champion it. MyLink needs a champion in another community. So MyLink is launching in the Sandhills, or has launched in the Sandhills. I'm not the champion of it. There's a local person there who is leading it. If I go up to the Sandhills and say, hey, this is great, they're gonna be like, oh my God, a person from Lincoln, get out. We do not care about what Lincoln and Omaha think. That'd be counterproductive. They wanted it. They have a local person. I work with her to be successful, make sure that all their outreach is solid. They lead it. So I think the challenge is finding the right person to implement it, but once you find that person, you want a local champion. You don't want somebody from Lincoln telling another community, this is what works.
Well, so then on the other hand, then you could probably potentially connect up with, like, say, the United Way people who have contacts through thousands of other cities and say, hey, who's the key person who might be a potential champion?
Certainly, certainly.
I mean, is that a path that you considered going down, or right now you've just been kind of like passively marketing?
Right now, passively marketing just to make sure that we get it right. For now.
Yeah, you talked about, I know you said you've only been at Kawasaki a couple of months, but what lessons do you see that you can transfer across from things like MyLink in terms of building the teams? You've got lots of different cultures and nationalities there at Kawasaki. Is there certain things that'll be, you want to put similar things in place?
Definitely. I mean, I think, when we get applicants into our facility who maybe don't come from a white background, right, who are people of color, what we really want to do is say, hey, this is a place you can be successful, and show folks, hey, like, if you go around the floor, you can see the diversity of our place. So what we don't want to do is be a place where you just apply and you get a yes or a no without seeing it. So really it's seeing the facility, seeing how interactive it is, seeing how the training is visual with like a PowerPoint, but it's also hands-on, it's also verbal. There's people right next to you who can help you. So it's really kind of showing that this is a place where you can grow. We're also about to roll out an English language learner program. We're going to offer classes to increase people's English, specifically around the language that they need to be successful here. So think about the action verbs around manufacturing, think about the vocabulary. So it's really showing people they can be successful less than telling people they can be successful in an interview. I think that's our biggest selling point, is showing this facility, I think.
Do you have hunches about why the so difficult to be hiring in manufacturing?
We're out of people.
I mean, so is it a thing that with the pandemic, okay, certain industries, no longer need as many people, but then other industries need a lot more, and so there's kind of a shift that hasn't really happened? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly since the pandemic's begun, places like manufacturing and healthcare have tried to pick up people who maybe got laid off from hospitality. The trick is that people who work in hospitality have typically always worked in hospitality, similar to a person who's in manufacturing has typically worked in manufacturing for quite a while. So having that person go from a flexible schedule, maybe a late night schedule, maybe a tip type salary environment versus an hourly environment, it's a big shift to get people to move around industries. Tabitha Health here locally has actually been very successful with people who were laid off during the pandemic, not in their environment, and hiring them into their environment for things like senior care, especially with hospitality folks, because they do provide food. They do go through all that process. It's just that your customers are already in your building. So they're really successful at that. Overall, what I would say is how Kawasaki can be successful hiring people is certainly the pay, right? That's certainly it. But it's also talking about how people can grow, because the pay only is an incentive for so long. But the second part is truly reaching out into the community and finding folks who are underemployed and simply don't realize they can come over to Kawasaki. Oh no, I've never worked there. I've never worked in manufacturing, I couldn't get a job there. It's really overcoming that barrier of the unknown, I think, is the way to fill our needs. There aren't that many people out there in Lincoln right now who say, I've been in manufacturing for 3 years, but I'm unemployed, but I want a full-time job. That person doesn't exist. It's finding people who can be successful that simply haven't been in the environment before, I think, will be the vast majority of our new hires. Or ask me again in a year and I could be wrong.
Can you talk about, have you learned any lessons about what it's like to have a spouse who has their own business and working with her, or just what it's like for her to also have her own business?
Yeah, so we certainly, Janelle is the leader of our business. It's really her brain that powers this thing. I really kind of consider myself the color commentator, and she's the play-by-play announcer. It's really kind of the metaphor that I think best fits. And when I think about how can we be successful as a husband and wife in a business, is respect. She's smarter than me. I know. She's a better writer than me. I'm aware of that. She can synthesize faster than me. I know. But I have my strengths too. I know every nonprofit in this town. I've worked with all of them for the last 9 years in some way. And I know, I have a good idea of maybe what they're looking for. So with Janelle's ability to have this structured thought, to be able to listen people and succinctly understand what they're saying, and with my ability to understand, oh, okay, I know what that nonprofit does, I know who their audience is, you combine those two things. And I think that's why we're successful. And also, those two skill sets just don't step over each other very much. And also, if I write something and she edits, I leave it alone. And if she writes something and says, do you want to edit this? Let's say I go lightly. Because most of the time, she'll say, no, here's why. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's better. It's all true. It's not flattery. I married up. I'm aware of this. So when I think about how to grow MyLink, especially in terms of community awareness, because what we find is about 50% of people who use MyLink are helping other people. And about 50% of people who use MyLink are seeking services. So you think about police officers, case managers, you name it, they use the app just as much as people in need. That tells me that we have more work to do, because I don't think that's the ideal balance. That's what it is now. So to your point, I think it's really, right now it's really individual reach out, but if you have ideas about how to reach churches en masse, because there's a lot of faith communities in Lincoln, I'd be happy to hear any suggestions. You could tell me now, or we can meet offline, but if I had all the time in the world, I would sit down and figure out a way to get a way to communicate with the different church leaders about community services. To my knowledge, there's not a great way to do that right now.
Hey Brian, this is Darren Kruger.
Hey Darren.
Thanks for all the shout outs, man.
You're welcome. I'm sure I got one more in me.
Right. Hey, are you guys, I'm sorry if I missed that, just step away briefly for a phone call, but are you guys still connected with ASI as an entry point, as your labor company? And then the prices you quote, are you talking about people coming right in as Kawasaki employees, or is that through the ASI channel?
Yeah, Darren, that's a great question. So what we're really trying to do, what Darren's talking about is ASI is a temp to hire firm that we have through Kawasaki. Typically what we do is if people perform to their goals at 90 days, we'll turn them over from ASI to full-time. But really what I'm doing with Kawasaki is focusing on direct hire. So this person would come in on day one and be a Kawasaki employee, and they would not go through ASI. So the hourly rates that we discussed, that's for direct hire, but that's really what we want to move into more and more. ASI will always be with us, because there's such a need for a flexible workforce. But we also really want to grow our full-time external staff to be successful. So the 1810 assembly hourly rate and the 1990 welding rate, those are full-time external hires that would be Kawasaki employees on day one.
Okay, thank you.
Any other last questions? Okay, well, thank you so much,
Sure.
Bryan. And this is for you.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Of course.
And thank you everybody for coming. Feel free to stick around, chat with Bryan, ask him more questions, have another cup of coffee, hang out on Zoom if you want. And we will see you next week. Thank you.